Okay, so after an hour and 33 minutes ish, right before they start talking about, uh, oh my goodness, right after the bailout, pardon me. Um, so there's a lot of information here that gets pretty heavy. So what we're really addressing now in this final, I guess it's been 35 minutes ish since the last video. Um, in this 35 minutes, we really talked about the housing market crash in 2008 and how that happened. Okay. So basically, he starts to explain, which is really the focus of his documentary, is kind of how capitalism is obviously disastrous for the country. He starts to talk about house repossessions, which he already showed us at the beginning of the documentary with that family, the two families getting kicked out of their home, and then the condo vultures and the guy that was selling repossessed homes for cheaper and making a lot of money off of it. So we've kind of heard a little bit about it. Now he explains how they did it. So this is really capitalism at its worst. What ends up happening is these banks started realizing we want to get old people out of their homes. Okay, because what ends up happening is old people, when they've paid off their mortgages, because I say old people, usually it takes people a fair bit of time to pay off a mortgage, but once they paid it off, they're kind of useless to a bank because the bank is no longer collecting payments from anyone. So what they want is that home to be sold to someone else that someone new is now paying for the home, right, to the bank. So their thing was they were trying to get people to refinance their mortgages, which is basically add money onto your mortgage, and then when the old people couldn't pay them, they'd get kicked out. So put it this way: imagine I was trying to, like I took out a mortgage just last week for my house. Imagine that I wanted to now fix my basement up. So I'm going to add money onto my mortgage. I took out a mortgage of hypothetically $400,000. I'm going to need $20,000 to redo my basement. So I'm going to add $20,000 on my mortgage, which means basically I'm just going to pay my mortgage for longer, right? So I'm going to add that money onto my mortgage so I continue paying. And it seems like that's all fair, and that's nothing, right? I'm just paying an extra few years of my mortgage, whatever. But that's not what they did. Instead of just refinancing, they added all of these like little fine print things at the bottom. And they're basically saying, well, we can also give you guys extra payments, and we can also put the interest rates up to 200%, he showed. So these people, like their payments that was, $1,000 became, $1,700, and then all of a sudden $2,700. And so they're paying way more than what they were before. But it's not like they're making more money. So eventually people tap into their savings to try and make their payments. But your savings run out after a while, right? If you're not making more money, if you're paying more, but your money stays here, well, eventually that savings isn't going to be enough. So these people started to not be able to pay their mortgages. And the way mortgages work out is that when you don't pay, your home gets taken away, you get kicked out. So it was initially targeted at old people because they realized that, old people were easy targets to try and get them to get a little money to spend on medical bills and on perhaps vacations and savings for educations for their children, whatever. And they were able to get them out of their houses. Then they realized that there is a market for a lot of people. You can try and, put this towards a ton of people who would be interested in having a little extra cash or signing up for a mortgage when they can't afford it. So then she shows the example of the countrywide example of the white lady with the blonde hair. And she's talking about all these people who can't afford a mortgage. And she's like, a young couple with no down payment money, and a business owner who can't keep track of his pay, and whatever. And he's talking about all these people who are a family that's in a lot of debt. And these are all people who the bank shouldn't be giving money to. For instance, if I didn't have money for a down payment, does it look like to the bank like I have money to be able to make payments every month? Like, it doesn't look good, right? The reason they ask for down payment is that it shows that you can save and you have the ability to make money. And so for them, why would you want to give them a mortgage? Same thing for a family with debt. If you've got debt, then you're not paying it off enough. Why should you borrow more money, right? So the bank was tailoring this to people who were already desperate. Now, if you're a young person, you really need a house and whatever, you're going to take the first deal that comes at you. You don't even think about all the little fine prints and stuff like that, right? And so these people were signing on for mortgages, not realizing that in the fine print it said you're going to get charged more and more and more. They were vulnerable people in debt already, not a lot of money coming in, not the ability to save. And then the bank was just charging them more and more and more. So they were easy targets to get out of their houses. So they end up doing this to minorities a ton, people who worked, less stable jobs who might get laid off, people who didn't have savings, people who had debt, whatever. And that's how they were able to get them out of their homes. He uses the example of Countrywide because the lady looks very pleasant and she says, oh, we all got them approved. It's a trick. She seems so nice and she seems so like, oh, wow, like I'd love to sign up with Countrywide for a mortgage. But, he kind of compares it to the mafia saying like, they promise you a really sweet deal, but then later on when they want the money back, they come and shake you down and they hurt you if you don't get it. And in this case, they kick you out of your house, right? So it was all a ploy to make money to get these people out of their homes. So while they're paying, you're charging them a lot of extra. When they can't pay, you get to resell the house and make more on it. So the banks were literally putting people in financial distress, hoping that they wouldn't be able to make their payments and get kicked out. Okay? So what ended up happening is they kept doing this and kept doing this and kept doing this. Well, eventually that's not sustainable. You can only kick so many people out of their houses and keep reselling the homes till eventually there's no one to buy homes. And as we were seeing, these young people coming up from their education, they aren't making a lot of money. So it's not like they're saving up to buy these repossessed homes. No one's got money. So they kept repossessing, kept, kicking people out of their homes. And eventually there was no one left. So no one was investing in these banks anymore. No one was buying homes anymore. So the banks were running out of money at this point. They collected so much, but now no one's coming and keeping to fund the banks. So they start to go broke. And they start to explain market derivatives, and this gets really complicated. But basically what they ended up doing is they kind of, imagine they were in a casino and they're betting money on the stock market. They were losing these bets. But because no one was, my light went off. Because no one was investing in the banks, making purchases, the banks no longer had the money to pay for those bets that they were losing on the stock market. So they lost all this money. So now the bank goes in failure. And so he showed the stock market crash when it's just like a total disaster. And the banks are all failing. They're all going broke, right? And they need to be bailed out. So at this point, again, it's really complicated. So I'm not expecting you guys to fully understand the how the derivatives worked and how the market crashed. Like it's complex, and I'm not very strong in finance either. Like I understand enough to say I know what happened. But basically what ended up happening is the banks had no more money because people lost their jobs, were getting kicked out of their homes. So they have no money to bring back to the bank, which means the bank who created this system is now failing. So it was from the bottom up, it ended up failing. So they fall, right? So now they need to be bailed out. So Michael Moore kind of talks about all these guys who worked in government and also for banks. So he talks about Robert Rubin and a bunch of other officials that worked in the treasury. So the treasury is like literally the bank account of the U.S. Taxpayer dollars that get taken off, checks and whatever, go to the treasury. And then that money gets, basically budgeted out to the country for all the different services they need to pay. Pardon me. And so literally Robert Rubin worked in the treasury, but also worked for the banks before and after. So do you think that he's going to be unmotivated? Well, no, clearly he wants to try and help out the banks because that money's going to come back to him. Those connections are still there. So he started creating all these different regulations that allowed the banks to do things that were basically illegal to make money, but that were unstable. And that's what led to this bailout. Okay. So now they're like, okay, we need money to bail ourselves out from the system. So they go to government, to the treasury, and say, we need a $700 billion bailout to be able to stabilize the banks so that they survive and don't have to crash. Because if the stock market crashes, the country crashes. They've got no money, right? So they go to the government now. Well, here's the problem. Pardon me. Here's the problem with the bailout. This is taxpayer dollars. If this is Canada, that's my dollars. That comes off my checks every month. Now, I already, I benefit from our services because we've got a great healthcare system and whatever here in Canada. But I want my taxpayer dollars to go somewhere good because they take off a fair bit of the money that I make every month. And like when I see it, I'm like, oh, that hurts because I wish I had that money. But that money gets taken by the government and they do things that help benefit me, like funding schools, like, healthcare, like funding prisons to keep the bad people away, whatever. So I want my taxpayer dollars to go somewhere good. I don't want it to go to the banks who ended up getting me out of my job, who, got me fired, who maybe took away my home. So for the taxpayers, this is a big, no. $700 billion of the money we paid that should come back to us in services, right? Now, what they tried to do is they tried to rush this deal and get the bailout to happen. So Secretary Paulson wrote a proposal of 3 pages asking for $700 billion of taxpayer dollars and tried to get Congress to pass it through, vote yes, and give it to the banks. And they want to rush it and create kind of this feeling of fear so that people said, okay, yeah, and voted on it. Sorry, guys. And voted on it because they didn't want people to stop and think about it. Because if it got out to the American people that this was happening in Congress, they would have went, whoa, hold on, that's not okay with me. And then they wouldn't have gotten the money. So that's why they tried to rush it. They tried to pressure people to make the deal right away. And then eventually, some of them, you can see there's a lot of Republicans who are like, we got to vote on this. We got to do it. Some of the Democrats are going, hold on. Marcy Kaptur was an example. She says, this is not okay. They're trying to not put any thought to this. They're trying to force us to do this. And so the American people found out and they went on a picket line. They protested. And so finally the vote got voted down. So it got denied. Okay. I'm sorry. So it got voted down. So now Secretary Paulson goes, okay, because the American people found out it got voted down, how can I find a way to do this? So he went to backdoor. He went to some of these Democrats who voted it down and said, okay, if you vote it up, if we put the vote back and you vote yes instead of no this time, we'll give you some money. Okay. We'll help you get your next senator seat. We'll help you become president one day and we'll fund your campaign. So basically made them promises and saying, you know what, if you help us, we'll help you later. Okay. Absolute corruption, right? So now they re-voted and they passed the deal. So the Democrats eventually, some of them, were corrupted and said yes. So now the bailout was given off to the banks. $700 billion of taxpayer money went to the banks, who don't deserve that money. They're the ones who got people to lose their jobs, took away their homes, and now we're going to give them more. It doesn't make any sense. It's their fault this happened. But that's what they did. So as Michael Moore is talking to some of these congressmen and women on the Hill there, he says, you know, this is like a financial coup d'etat. Literally, it's like the banks control government now because they can just use money and say, hey, we'll give you money if you help us. And so they're allowing for laws to be created in their favor by using money to make it happen. So it's absolute corruption between government and banks, which should not mix. The government should be regulating the banks, making sure that they're working, you know, good for the American people. And yet the banks are saying, no, do this for us. So they're calling the shots because they've got the money. So that's how the bailout happened. Now you have to remember that this is widespread. This is all over America, right? And if you go places, you'll see the effects of it. There's houses boarded up everywhere, right? Like I said, for instance, my brother lived in a home in Arizona that was worth like $800,000 or something, and it was paid like $300,000 in that range, which is a huge difference. Like this is happening everywhere. So you have to imagine how many American people were affected by this, how many families, and how upset they would be that they're basically being treated like they're animals, like they're nothing, by the people above them, which are their bosses, the banks, and the government, right? So there's clear corruption that happened here. The banks hurt the people, but then they got the money to save themselves. All right. So I'm going to leave it there and I'll let you watch the rest of the film. And then my last video is for the end.